Hi, everybody. It's Alex Jarett again, and I've got Patrick Rafferty, who's the Senior Technology Delivery Lead at BMO Financial Group. But you're going to talk about organizing your technology-based career uh, for success, which I love. Not everybody thinks like that. This particular segment, we're going to talk about career arc and work ethic. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So let me do a little introduction first before we get into the questions. You're in New Mexico, right? Calling in. And I met Pat. You were at another huge bank and you were running all their, a big chunk of their IT operations, as I recall. And then you moved over to BMO and you told me in one of our talks in your interview, you're known as the fixer, right?
Yes. Yeah, I built a reputation for taking projects that were a year behind schedule or a million or 5 million over budget and managing to turn them around, typically within whatever agreed new schedule and budget, or under. And I think a lot of that has to do with good habits
Yeah.
and indomitable will to succeed. So that was why I proposed this topic, because I think in particular, so my background, my first 10 years of my career was on the accounting finance side, so reporting to CPAs and
Yeah.
CFOs.
Yeah.
Very different mindset
Yes.
than your typical technologist. So I built some great habits that we don't really teach, certainly not developers, but even a lot of our PMs and BAs. And so I think that's where, when I did my master's at Columbia, the founder of that program, a brilliant guy named Art Langer,
Yeah.
um, you know, yeah.
No, I'm just saying, yeah, I'm
uh,
listening. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. We're buddies. We
he's kind
golf
of a
all the time.
legend.
Yeah.
But he said, one of the first things he said in my first class at Columbia, he says, "My job here is to make you all impressive, because you're not." And that was how that program started for every cohort. And uh, I had a leg up coming out of the accounting and financial space where I think
Uh,
more of that training occurs. So that's kind of what we're talking about, and then how that I think influences your career, because excellence is always rewarded.
yes. Yeah. It may take time, but eventually you get there. And you and I know are both big fans of Winston Churchill. And I know he thinks a lot. He was a big thinker on these kind of things too. He just plowed through. All right. Well, let's go. Let's start with your quote. Why don't you, for this segment, why don't you read the quote and then we'll talk about each one? How's that?
Yeah. So I ran into this quote recently,
Hmm.
and it's from Aristotle. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not really an act, but a habit.
Hmm. That,
And hmm,
what, go ahead. Why did that strike you is like,
well, a lot of times when you're under pressure, I
hmm,
think it's our habits, you look at it from a like psychoanalysis perspective, it's your unconscious that kicks in.
yeah,
Uh, and in particular, in something like what Kim was just talking about in like a cybersecurity incident or a
yeah.
production incident is more my experience. It's those habits that you practice, that you honed, which are going to help you make that critical decision.
Hmm.
And so finding, like, selecting those habits and reinforcing them, and knowing which ones are good and bad and who to learn them from, I think is where, especially early in our careers, but even in the middle, we have to focus on. And I think a lot of us can say, like, we could probably rattle off our, what good habits are, being on time, being reliable, being, professional, being, you know, conscientious, etc. But I usually boil things down into kind of like phrases that I've
Hmm.
learned from mentors over the years.
Yeah.
So, when you look around, I always give to really young people the recommendation that your first job, interview your boss. I think we should all always do that. So as you go through your career, remember the person who's going to promote you is your boss.
Yeah.
So you need to find someone that is interested in you and ready to put that extra effort. And so I always say, if I'm impressed by someone, and I should be impressed by my boss, then I should want to take on some of their habits.
Yeah.
And so, and if you don't, if you're not impressed by your boss, you should work for somebody else. If I'm being completely honest, like I really feel strongly about that. So, um, when I look at kind of some of my favorite good habit phrases,
Mm-hmm.
bad news sells better early. So if, and I learned that from a guy I worked for, the first guy I worked for on Wall Street.
Mm-hmm.
Measure twice, cut once, more from my mom and a couple bosses over the years.
Yeah.
You know, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, the golden rule. And I think if you internalize these things and reinforce them, then you're going to find that you do these automatically so that you won't have to remind yourself again. Almost
Mm-hmm.
like a mission statement of, and we're going to get into it in a little bit, but like
Yeah.
kind of driving the off goal. So I figure once you know who you want to mimic and identify those behaviors you want to enforce, those habits you want to reinforce,
Mm-hmm.
then I think the harder part is spotting the bad habits.
Yeah. Well, look, let's get to that. I see that's going
Yeah.
to be on the next slide. But before I jump to that next slide, I just want for the folks that are involved now and listening later, um, you know, Patrick is known for not only being the fixer of these huge projects, but also standing up to the powers that be and saying, this is the reality and and this is what we need to do. And I know in your interview you talked about that multiple times about not being afraid of telling them like it is and they're to fix it and they respect that, and that's one of the reasons you've risen so quickly. But you also gave some tips in the interview on how to do that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
So
but
yeah,
it's these values that got you there.
exactly. And I'm a really bad liar, but besides that, you'll find it's easier, I think, but it is so much better to say to an executive, there's a problem here, but you don't go in there and I'll never forget one of my first full-time job I had. They gave me a project that I had no idea what I was doing. And I got frustrated and I go into the lady I was working for, her office, and I say, will you help me with this? And she says, yes. And then I went and dropped it on her desk. And she says, nah, no, I'll help you with it, but we're going to do it together.
Mm-hmm.
So in that vein, I walked in without a solution. Now, at this point in my career, if I'm bring bad news, I better have thought about how to fix it. So
Mm-hmm.
that was another great habit. You know, never come with just a problem, always come with a solution. And I think it's just really easy for our staff to try to dump stuff on us.
Oh, that's interesting. They dump it back up. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, I think it's easy, and it's also easy, I think, for us as a bad management habit. And I'm as guilty of this as probably a lot of other folks, but I'll just deal with it because I think it'll be faster if I fix it. That used to be a really bad habit of mine. So
Yeah.
I'll just say, well, I can get this done in 10 minutes. I know the people who can get it done. I've got the relationships. And instead of saying, okay, I need this person to learn how to do this because they're going to have to do it again.
Yeah.
So,
Makes a lot
uh,
of sense, Pat. Hey, let's jump to the next slide. And you were starting to move into this. So I took your bullets and made them a couple different slides. And just so you know, that's the next one after that, okay? The ultimately
okay.
profitable.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I covered most of this. So
Well,
again, I think the hardest thing is to spot the habits were bad. And just a little piece of advice. Don't wait until your review comes around to find out that you have developed some negative habit, something that's
Uh-huh.
not working for you. And one of the things, we have these open door policies at companies now. Even when my boss, at the level I've been at for a few years, I don't often have, I'm kind of a lone operator under a very, very senior person. And in that respect, I don't expect a lot of one-on-one time with that individual, but I always go out of my way to have a monthly check-in, usually not just with like one peer that I like, one or two employees, or maybe down a level in a parallel group or something, and then of course my boss and maybe another executive every quarter, just to check in and say, hey, what could I be doing better? And that's a habit too, because a lot of times I think we get so busy that we forget that the purpose of working, unless we've decided to just sit at the same level for the rest of our careers, the purpose is to find that next opportunity. So within the organization or elsewhere. So ultimately, we need these habits reinforced over 5-10 years will kick in when maybe you're distracted or you've got something going on at home personally that will put you, and you're not thinking about it, and you'll encounter someone and just out of good habit, you'll say, hey, you're in town, great to meet you. Sorry I didn't schedule any time, but if you have a few minutes, I'd love to get feedback, or that sort of thing. So with that in mind, there is the core work habits, I think, around, again, to me, the most important are these kind of sayings, measure twice, cut once. When those kick in, when you're under pressure, that's what'll save you. So.
Mm-hmm. So give us a couple more examples of what just shoot them off, because this is really, I think, for many people are going to be very valuable.
Okay.
Yeah.
So besides those sayings, be on time. I know this is kind of every meeting I go to, it's 5 to 10 minutes. So one of the great habits I use that configuration in Outlook where it cuts the meeting off at 5 minutes or 10 minutes before. And so I think meeting management, developing good meeting habits, always be prepared.
Mm-hmm.
It is so much better to reschedule a meeting you're not prepared for than to show up unprepared and have it be a disaster. And I think a lot of times if we have like a big audience, we forget, just say, hey, sorry folks, oops, and I know I'll be ready next time. Be accurate, and I think, yeah, and listen. And I've got a couple of good reads recommended for the end, but really, a lot of these things come back to the golden rule, but since it's hard to step outside ourselves, what do we want? We want to be listened to when we're imparting a challenge, when we're asking for help.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to listen. And those combined with the measure twice, cut once, which means it's better to have a plan and a strategy than to go and do something without thinking it through and then have to do it all over again. So.
This is really good stuff, obviously. And if you're all listening and you just take some of this, it's going to improve your career. So let's get to this next one. Why don't you read this one and tell us what you were thinking on this one?
So when we define excellence in our own lives and at work, I always think of this phrase that another great mentor used to say. He says, what does good look like?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times I think we want to box that into a very specific, we want to bucket that into something like definition of done from the Agile framework. And that's part of it. But I really look at this as at the end of the day, when I log off today, or I go home from the office,
Mm-hmm.
am I going to have any regrets? And I can say the same thing in my own life. When I go home, am I going to feel like I screwed people over when I go wherever we go from here?
Yeah.
I'm going to feel like I did the best I could, that I was fair to people, that I achieved what I wanted to achieve in a manner that was acceptable to me. And so when I think about excellence, I don't think about just, meeting the objectives of the project, or that's, in some cases it might be as simple as a definition of done like it. But I want to know that, like, I feel good about this. I feel good about the work I've done. I feel good about this day, not just the work I did today, but the dinner I had with a friend this evening, or the time I got to spend with my dog.
Hmm.
So when I think about that, really, I think you have to have all three prongs. You've got to have kind of a moral happiness, a moral, I'm going to be happy when, in a business context, I'd say, like, I'm going to be happy that I was able to achieve what I wanted to do in a reasonable amount of time, that I was maybe thanked for it. And there's different ways to measure it. So maybe I
Hmm.
was thanked in terms of by individuals, or I got credit for it later. And that the product was something I'd want to use, when I put it in a technology context, like,
Hmm.
this is this a good solution? Did we get our money's worth? Like, if I was paying for it, would I be happy with the outcome? And so I look at that to my personal life, and I say, one of the reasons I'm down here, there's a couple, personal reasons,
Yeah.
family, and when you just make those decisions, yes, I had to give up perhaps certain aspects professionally, but I'm still doing good work that I'm proud of, and have the ability to do the things that I need to do that make me proud of my personal life. So,
That's a really good. I mean, those are really good insights, and I think if you can't be, I think one way of saying, you can't be broken outside and do good work inside all the time. It just ain't going to happen. You have to look at your life as well as your work together, and that's a little bit of what you're saying. And let's go to this quote because I think it ties in with what you just talked about.
so I see,
Let's
again,
read it. Do me a favor for the
as a
recording.
striving for excellence
Yeah.
helps you succeed in the most difficult of circumstances.
Yeah.
And so, because I've set good habits, if we go back to the very beginning,
Yeah.
reinforce them, and then I've said, okay, this is what success looks like, or good looks like in my day to day, and built those habits over time. That becomes the standard to live up to. And
Yes.
so when things get difficult, when that impossible project comes, you lose a whole team or a vendor. I'll never forget when we had a vendor that wouldn't sign a new MSA, and we lost 12 people on my team on the same day that were contractors, like right before go live, and managed to make it through. Or a lot of times it's key people, or you have an event, a regulatory outcome that's um, not in your favor, and somebody's got to do the work. Well, they're going to come to somebody who's, you know, a happy giver, that knows how to
Yeah.
get things done, and can do it with a smile on their face, and has a track record of success. And then that's going to give you confidence to know that you can take on that project and succeed at it. And I think that's where a lot of times we the reason they come to me with these projects over the years, because I don't sit there and go, okay, how am I going to cover my ass? Sorry. In this
They
situation
trust
first.
you.
And so
Yeah.
instead, my first response is, okay, let's get it done, and then we'll figure out if we need to CYA later. And so,
Yeah.
um, and I think that confidence comes from knowing that I've built these habits, that usually I can always find a path to good. So,
It's interesting. I think the other thing that comes from is you told me in your interview, your mom, because she just instilled in you this confidence because she just loved you so much. And, you know, I'm like a self-help junkie, Patrick. I've read all this stuff. And I think that really, really makes a difference. And we talked about mindset before. Another one I'm going to add in this one, and let's for this slide is there's this I do meditations and affirmations. One is I am worthy, and I think you have to feel worthy of being excellent.
Mhm.
And I think some people maybe don't feel that way. And if you find that in yourself, figure that out, right, Pat? I mean,
Never.
because you deserve to be at this excellent level. And the tips that you're giving, will get that. People will get there if they start thinking about it. So in
It's
fact, let's
also,
go ahead. Go ahead.
it's,
Let's
and
continue that
that's
on.
where we get to this.
Yeah,
And this is the last point. Like once it feels good, the pat on the back, there's nothing like a good pat on the back. I don't, and a thank you. And all
that's
these
right.
other things are, yeah, you're not gonna have it when you're done here. So, but what you will remember and what people will remember about you are those, excuse me, moments where you really lived up to your values. That's what you're gonna be proud of when the time comes. So, and what I find, whether it's a team or me, but now, I've gotten to the point, I wouldn't say it's cocky, but having done enough of these things where I just like if I don't succeed, I'm gonna be so mad. And so, and I'm gonna find a way to do what needs, what I've committed to doing in a manner that I'm proud of. And
Y-
I
y-
find it with teams as well, by when you achieve, the excellence begets excellence, success breeds more success. And that's why this is so important, because once you set the habits in place, then the rest of this just comes. But a lot of times I think we get focused on all the wrong things. And so we've quick carrot, like results are not, sometimes it feels like nobody else is looking for results. So why should I? And I'll tell you, because it feels good, man or woman.
it feels
Yeah.
good to have. It feels good to have some wins. You know, we could go with the whole thing about the generations and everything, but at the end of the day, you got to get stuff done. And I used to be. We used to be. I used to be in the game business. I was a partner in a game development company. Finishing is the hardest thing.
Mhm.
Finishing that product or the project, this kind of stuff you're on, is the hardest thing, and it takes that every time. It takes that Herculean effort to
Yeah.
get that thing done. And that's just the way it is. That's what it takes to be excellent. And if you look at anyone who's ever created anything of value, they'll relate to this statement. And I think you're right on target. So let's move to the next one where you answer the question. So the question is, what happens what happens when we achieve excellence? How do we perpetuate that? That's the question. And I think you've given us the answer here. Why don't you
Yeah.
read it? Yeah.
So we have to proactively, and this ties into what Ms. Kim said just before, was we want to be proactive, not in managing change in ourselves, so that we continue to achieve excellence and we develop these great habits and continue to develop them. And that's the hard part, I think, especially if, I had some awful habits, and I will just admit it, that took a certain set of bosses and kind of a bit of a career shift to get excited again, for me to have the energy to change them. And
Yeah.
I'll admit, it's a constant battle, um, to continue to build good habits. And so one of the things I remember and vividly of another Columbia experience, it's very hard to change habits. What do they say? 21 days or something to develop a habit.
Yeah.
But if you think about it in your workplace, there's a lot of things you don't do 21 days in a row. You might do it once a year, or once a quarter, or once a month, or less even than that. And so building habits personally and in an organization requires a certain amount of, a certain framework or approach and a commitment to do so. So I'll start back at very early in my career. I had this great CFO, and he advised me to set goals, 5-year goals, personal, professional, financial. And I'll admit, I never met the financial goals.
Mhm.
I would ultimately achieve the personal and the professional goals, but it took longer. And I think that's just part of goal setting,
Mhm.
especially personal goal setting is you have to realize that you're probably not, one of them was to be a millionaire at 25. That just wasn't in the cards. It's unfortunate, but and so as I worked through those and I would revise them and then I would put back when we still had like um, boards in our cubicles, I would paste them on right next to the computer
Mhm.
and then look at these each day. And I did the same thing with my objectives so that if there was a question of priority, I could look at my objectives and say, is this on my objectives? If it's not, then you ask another set of questions. So when it comes to goal setting, just do it, but do not overdo it and don't let yourself get demoralized if you don't meet all your goals, especially professional, personal goals. I mean, and that's what they are, it's different than objectives. Your objectives for work are different than goal setting for you. I
Yeah.
really think all this stuff starts with me first. I can't expect it of my team or my organization. Let's start with number one, and then as part of those goals, that's how you're going to set your work. Your work-life balance will come from that. And this comes back to that whole picture. What does good look like? Usually it's not that I'm getting paid a bunch of money to barely work and go party all the time. That's not how this usually works, folks. But at the same time, if money is something that's important to me in my goal setting, then I need a job that's going to meet those needs, and I need to give that job its due.
Mhm.
But because if I'm not doing well at work, I'm probably not going to do well in life either. So I think that making work a priority and life a priority, as opposed to deprioritizing work to make life work, is how that balance can be achieved. And that's, again, there's no one size fits all solution there. And finally, especially achieving that work-life balance, achieving happiness at work, so much of it has to do with focusing on the reasons, again, and you'll find this in your goal setting. What kind of a boss do you want? What kind of role, what kind of team is important to you?
Mhm.
That means sometimes you got to deprioritize money, or maybe sometimes that means you've got to make a change in your industry or approach or where you want to be so that you can be successful on all fronts. And I think that is something where a lot of people do, like, go to a life coach. That's a lot of what they're going to do. But really, this is about sitting down and saying, Patrick, hi, my name's Patrick. Getting to know yourself and really understand yourself. And a couple great resources for this. And this is
Oh, that's
so
one of the questions that came in. So go ahead.
yeah.
I'll tell you,
So
save that for the question, the
okay,
Q&A
that's
area.
fine. Yeah, I'll save it for the
Yeah.
question. So
Yeah.
again, I really think building good habits start with the goals, start with the right boss, right role, and an emphasis on yourself. So again, like I always say, whether interview, you should be focused on getting feedback. You should be focused on to be honest with yourself, and then literally just list out like a T account of what you think your good habits are. And this is a great exercise with your boss.
Yeah.
These are the things I think I'm good at. So there's always those 3 columns. These are the things I think I'm good at and I like. These are the things I think I'm not good at, but I like to do. And these are the things that I'm not good at and I don't like to do.
Yeah.
And then take those 3 columns, look at your job description and see how closely they line up. And and maybe that's where you start that conversation with your boss, because again, you may have a great boss and you may not be in the right role, or you may be in the wrong location. There's a lot of these things, but I think it starts with that conversation with yourself to say, hey, what do I want? And keep it a bite-sized list, 20 items on each, but personal, professional, financial, 5 goals each. And then say, okay, how does my work fit into those goals?
Yeah.
And do that exercise with yourself.
That's great advice. Well, let's get to the questions in a minute, but let's just repeat this here. And I'm just gonna say I really love this quote. You know, it really is about discipline. You know, you figure out what you want in life, in your job, in your life, whatever, and then but you just have there's the secret. You can attract it to you. You can think positive, right? But you still have to do the work.
Exactly.
And you know, if you have your goals, you have your positive thoughts, you're attracting the right kind of situations to you. At the end of the day, you got to be disciplined and do the right things to make it happen, right, Pat?
Yes, sir. That's what we have to do.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. This is great. So thanks for bringing that to our attention. So let's go to the last slide, which is any questions and resources. And one has already come in. Same fellow that asked on the last one for the resources. You know, you've obviously read a lot about this. Any good reading materials or books or any other resources that you recommend to kind of help steer someone through some of this stuff?
So I would say I think one of the best habit books as far as dealing with people and emotional intelligence is How to Win Friends and Influence People, Dale
Yeah.
Carnegie.
Yeah, I remember that.
It's an old book, but oldie but a goodie, and that stuff works. So I think that is a great habit book. The other, if you want to really understand the unconscious, the subconscious mind, uh, Freud's The Unconscious Mind, I think is what it's called, is really good, and that's an older book. Again, these are not new ideas.
No,
And
they don't need to
then,
be. Yeah.
and then the last one, which is a little newer, this is more of a framework. So once you decide to do this exercise, it's called Immunity to Change. And that book, it was actually taught, and one of the best parts of this course I took at Columbia in my master's about organizational development and change
Mm.
management was we had to change a habit, a work habit of our own over the course of the semester,
Oh,
following that framework. And it was tough. Because on top of going to Columbia, basically, I think we are doing 4 hours, 4 classes a semester on top of working 65 hours a week on Wall Street. It was very hard to focus on doing anything but the bare minimum in that situation. And so I focused on, I had this bad habit of, that's where that measure twice, cut once idea really, it was always in my head, but I didn't actually do it until I went through this process.
hmm.
And after, I just slowed down, and it was funny. The book goes into a mix of technical versus kind of habit forming or permanent solutions. And so you'll figure out, it works you through kind of how to create a set of technical things that you can change that are going to develop that habit. And then how to pick bite-sized things. Like I learned never to send an email before 7 a.m. because invariably, if I'm gonna send something that's half-cocked it's gonna happen at 6:45 in the morning. It's not gonna happen at
Mine is at
7:15.
11:45 at night.
Yeah, and so now like it gave me the means to sort of slow down and
Oh,
say,
I got you. The framework helped you slow
help me
down
to
and
do that. And then I said,
yeah,
okay, here's
yeah.
one of my problems is I end up having to like recall emails or I get yelled at because I missed something because I rushed something out to answer a question at 6 in the morning when nobody's going to care. If I'd sent that at 7:30 or 8:30, nobody was keeping a stopwatch on it, And so like that understanding, and so it helps you identify kind of some of these bad behaviors, and then you work to change those behaviors first proactively and then train them into yourself. And it's got a
That's such a great tip. Yeah, and you learned that
yeah,
from this book, Immunity to Change.
immunity to change. And yeah, and it's a framework that can be applied at your company as well. So they have an organizational, but they recommend you do a personal one first. So,
Hmm. That's awesome.
so yes, those are probably like, I mean, there's a lot of other, there's so much stuff
Yeah, of
out there
course, there's a
on
million of them, but yeah,
so
these are the ones that have helped you, and that's what we're looking for. You know, it's interesting about that. I have someone I used to work with a long time ago, and they would always say when you sent, well, it wasn't that long because it was emails, but um, they would say whenever you write an email later on, late at night, or you have an important concept or whatever that's kind of new, always sleep on it
Hmm.
before you send it or before you present it, because you want to make sure you're actually saying what you really want to say, and you also want to think about how you say it, and invariably the second or third iteration will always be better than the first and more concise and more precise. And so I think it goes along the line of some of the things that you're saying, Pat.
Absolutely. And that's where the unconscious mind, he talks a lot about how you dream. So if you set yourself up with something
Yeah,
that's in your, yeah, and then sleep on it, like you said, or just step away from it. Because
that's, yeah. It could be that. It could be take a walk and then finish it or something.
yeah.
Just give yourself a mind. Well, that's it. That's it for the question. So, Patrick, thank you so much. We appreciate you being on the board, and also this is just, there's a lot of wisdom in today's present discussion. So we appreciate you doing that. Let me show everybody how to see your interview, and we're going to go there again. If you go here to the Board of Advisors chart or page on our site, and where's Pat? There's Patrick right there, and great. We had a lot of fun. Whoop, we had a lot of fun on that
It
one.
was fun.
Yeah, yeah. So definitely watch this. You're gonna. I told you he was a thinker, but the thing is, he's a thinker that does and gets things done. So it's a little rare. Usually it's one side or the other. So this is your specialties and areas of interest. Organizing your technology-based career for success. That's what we're talking about today. Finding solutions to impossible problems, how to fix projects in crisis and make them work. It's what he does. And selling the value of technology within an organization. So you can find Patrick there and say hello, connect with him. And so again, let me get back to this slide here. Just want to say thank you, Patrick. Any final comments you want to make? Otherwise, thank you.
No, this has been a lot of fun. So thank you, Alex. And good to connect with everybody. Please feel free to reach out. And I'm if I'm not great at responding to LinkedIn mails, but I will probably I always respond to them by like Saturday.
That's good. That's fine. Don't worry about it. And Pat, I should have told Kim that we'll take this recording, package it up, we'll distribute this, but we'll also send you bits and pieces of it that you can post too, because I know you like to post. Not everybody has been doing that yet because they don't know how, but we'll be giving you a little package that you can use for this. Okay, that's part of it. All right, Patrick. Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you,
great
sir.
rest of the day.